What's going on, guys? It's Tom of Thompson Wrestling and welcome back to another video. This is a very long awaited video where today we are going to be discussing whether Christian was better in TNA or WWE. We're going to look through his careers in WWE and TNA and come to a decision at the end of the video, and I'm going to do it with the help of a little friend of mine who you can probably see in the title. He'll be joining me shortly, but let's get right into it. Let's waste no time. All I'm going to say is subscribe with notifications right now at this second and comment down below right now saying which wrestler you would like me to do this next with, who was a TNA and WWE wrestler. Anyway, let's get into it. In 1998, Edge put in a good word to the WWF for his friend Christian, and Christian was invited to the WWF affiliated Dory Funk Jr.'s Funkin' Conservatory training camp, and after completing his training, Christian officially signed a contract with the WWF. He debuted at Breakdown in Your House, aligning himself with Gangrel, and he would make his official debut match against Taka Michinoku at Judgment Day in Your House on October 18th in a match for the Light Heavyweight Championship, which he won. That's right, he won a title in his debut match, but he would lose his title to Gilbert a month later. He would become the character of a vampire, and him, Edge, and Gangrel formed the very memorable trio of the Brood. What a trio they were. Their first match as a team saw them defeat the Job Squad at Rock Bottom in Your House. They then briefly teamed with The Undertaker and the Ministry of Darkness, but eventually they turned on them after they tried to sacrifice Christian. 1998 and the Attitude Era was crazy. In 1999, Edge and Christian disassociated themselves with the Brood and began feuding with the Hardys, who began teaming with Gangrel to form the New Brood. Their feud with the Hardys would carry over to WrestleMania 2000, where Edge and Christian would defeat the Hardys and the Dudleys to win their first WWF tag titles in a triangle ladder match. We all remember this match. It was a true classic. They would hold the belts for about 2 months before losing them to Too Cool and then winning them back. Edge and Christian would slowly move away from their goth gimmick and would defend the titles against the Dudleys and the Hardys once again, this time at SummerSlam in the first ever TLC match. They would lose the titles to the Hardys at Unforgiven, but once again, they'd win them back a month later. They would lose them to the Dudley Boys at the 2001 Rumble, but then win them back at WrestleMania in the second TLC match against the Dudleys and the Hardys once again, and then they'd lose them for good to the Brothers of Destruction on the April 19th episode of SmackDown.
After they lost the titles, Edge would go on to win the King of the Ring and tensions would flare up between them. They would begin feuding with each other for the IC title, and at Unforgiven, Christian would defeat Edge to win his first singles title. He would lose it back less than a month later at No Mercy. However, he'd find success soon after when he defeated Bradshaw for the European Championship on an episode of Raw that same month. He would lose the title about 2.5 months later at the Royal Rumble to DDP. Christian would form the stable of the Un-Americans with Lance Storm, Test, and eventually William Regal. Christian and Storm would win the tag titles at Vengeance and would hold the titles for about 2 months before losing them to Kane and the Hurricane on an episode of Raw. I'm starting to notice a pattern with how long Christian's title reigns last. The Un-Americans would disband and Christian would form a team with Chris Jericho. They'd win the tag titles in October and then lose them 2 months later. How does this keep happening? Pretty much for the remainder of his first WWE run, Christian would float around as a single star, and whenever he won a title, he'd hold it for 2 months or less. He would have his famous match with Jericho at WrestleMania, he competed in the first ever Money in the Bank ladder match, and would wrestle in many title matches to losses. His contract expired on October 31st, 2005, and he was out the door.
On November 13th, Christian debuted with TNA at Genesis, announcing his intentions to win the world title from Jeff Jarrett. He would defeat Monty Brown at Turning Point to officially become the #1 contender for Jarrett's world title in December of that year, but wouldn't face Jarrett until Against All Odds in February the next year, where he would defeat Jarrett and win the world title. What a start to his TNA career. Cage would defend the title against an array of opponents. His first defense saw him defeat Monty Brown once again at Destination X. He defeated Abyss twice at Lockdown in Six Sides of Steel and at Sacrifice under Full Metal Mayhem rules, but ultimately, Christian's time as champion would come to an end when Jeff Jarrett regained the title at Slammiversary in a King of the Mountain match, also involving Abyss, Sting, and Ron Killings, aka R-Truth. At Victory Road, Sting, Christian, Scott Steiner, and Samoa Joe had a fatal 4-way #1 contenders match, which was won by Sting. After this, Christian and Sting would befriend each other and form an alliance of sorts. Christian would accompany Sting in his match against Jarrett at Hard Justice, where Christian would turn heel on Sting after bashing Jarrett's guitar over Sting's head and allowing Jarrett to pin him to retain the title. From there, Christian would enter a 3-month feud with Rhino, beating him in a singles match, street fight, and barbed wire 6 sides of steel match. Tomko would then debut in TNA, and Christian would set his sights back on the World Championship, with Tomko now by his side. At Turning Point, now champion Abyss retained the title in a 3-way against Sting and Christian, but Christian would win the title at the next pay-per-view Final Revolution in January of 2007 in a 3-way elimination match with the same contestants, making Christian a 2-time world champion in TNA. From here, Christian would defend the titles against the likes of Kurt Angle and Samoa Joe. Christian was announced as a captain for a Lethal Lockdown match against Team Kurt Angle. Christian's team of himself, Tomko, Scott Steiner, Kurt Angle, and Abyss, what a team, were defeated by Kurt Angle, Samoa Joe, Rhino, Jeff Jarrett, and Sting. TNA had major star power, man. Don't ever listen to anyone who tried to tell you TNA had no stars. They had major star power. On May 13th at Sacrifice, Christian would officially lose the title after he was stripped of the title, and then would lose a triple threat to Sting for the title, also involving Kurt Angle, who would come out on Impact and announce himself as the TNA World Heavyweight Champion, as NWA and TNA's alliance had ended. The remaining year in his TNA career, he formed Christian's coalition along with Tomko and AJ Styles, where Styles and Tomko would win the tag titles together. At Genesis, Tomko and Styles would retain the tag titles over the Steiner brothers and would accidentally cost Christian in his #1 contenders ladder match against Kaz. And then in the main event, Styles and Tomko would help Angle retain his title, joining the Angle's alliance while still being part of the coalition. After this, Christian would join the alliance, effectively ending the coalition, but this was short-lived and he would leave the Angle alliance not long after and feud with them. He forms the unlikely alliance with Kevin Nash and Samoa Joe, and they would defeat AJ Styles, Kurt Angle, and Tomko at Destination X 2008. On November 9th, 2008 at Turning Point, Christian would wrestle his final match against Booker T for the Legends title, where if he lost, he would join the Main Event Mafia. Christian did lose, and on the November 13th episode of Impact, when it looked like he was officially about to join the Main Event Mafia, he was attacked by all members after Angle learnt that he was going back to the WWE. Bit of a bitter send-off for Christian.
On the February 10, 2009 episode of ECW, Christian would appear and officially return to WWE. Yes, that's right, he returned on WWE's version of ECW. Christian returned confronting ECW champion Jack Swagger, and later that night he defeated Swagger in a non-title match. A title match was made between them 2 weeks later, which Christian would end up losing. At WrestleMania 25, Christian would compete in the Money in the Bank ladder match. I think he would have been a great contender to win the title, but CM Punk would end up winning it. Christian would wrestle Swagger for the title once again, and this time at Backlash, he would defeat Swagger to win the ECW title. But less than a month later, he'd lose the title to Tommy Dreamer at Extreme Rules in a triple threat that also involved Swagger. Looks like we're back to this, but psych! He'd win it back a month later from Dreamer at Night of Champions. And for once in his career, Christian would have a title reign that didn't last 2 months. Christian held the ECW title for around 6 months and carried the ECW brand on his back. On the final episode of ECW on February 16, 2010, Christian defended the title against Ezekiel Jackson in an Extreme Rules match and lost. That's right, after carrying the ECW brand on his back, WWE wouldn't even let Christian be the final ever champion. They gave it to Ezekiel Jackson, a guy who did virtually nothing afterwards. Christian would move over to the Raw brand, and at WrestleMania 26, he would once again compete in the Money in the Bank ladder match to a losing effort. Christian would move over to SmackDown in the 2010 draft, and once again, would find himself just floating around the roster. He competed in the Money in the Bank ladder match and lost, and he also made it to the final of a tournament for the vacant IC title, but again, he lost. In September, Christian would suffer a torn pectoral muscle that would leave him out of action for up to 6 months. Christian would make his return at the Elimination Chamber pay-per-view by making the save for Edge after Del Rio attacked him. He would accompany Edge at WrestleMania 27 for his match with Del Rio for the world title, which Edge would win. Shortly after Edge would shockingly retire and thus vacate his championship, a match was made for Extreme Rules between Alberto Del Rio and the winner of a Battle Royal, which was won by Christian. So, the match is on. Christian versus Alberto Del Rio for the world title at Extreme Rules in a ladder match, which Christian would win. Finally, Christian is a world champion in WWE. They might finally use him as a main eventer. Damn, this has lots of potential.
Oh, I just burped, but, this is the part where I tell you that he lost the title 2 days later. Yeah, he lost the title 2 days later to Randy Orton on an episode of SmackDown. So much wasted potential. Now, I will say, Christian and Randy Orton would go on to have a very entertaining feud. One of the best of the decade, in fact. It would see Christian turn heel at Money in the Bank 2011. Yes, that Money in the Bank event. Christian would win the title, but by DQ. Basically, the stipulation of the match was that if Randy Orton was DQ'd, Christian would win the title, and he did after Orton low-blowed him. So maybe this time he'll have a nice long reign. Well, no, because he lost it back to Orton at SummerSlam. It's hard to be angry at the same time, because this match was very good, but once again, it's just disappointing to see Christian have such a short reign of the title. But again, this feud was amazing, one of the best of the decade. They had some great matches, but it sucks that Christian didn't win the feud or hold the title for longer. After this feud, Christian would get bit by the injury bug and was pretty much cursed. Let's talk about it. So following this feud, Christian would begin feuding with Sheamus, which of course he lost, and his first injury would come when he injured his ankle on a European tour in November, adding to his big long list of injuries, with even more to come. He would make his return in February 2012 to show support for Raw GM John Laurinaitis, what an awful error that was, and would join Team Johnny to defeat Team Teddy at that year's WrestleMania, and on March 26th, he was injured once again. He would make his return as a babyface at Over the Limit 2012, competing in a Battle Royal where the winner would face either the US Champion or Intercontinental Champion later on in the night. Christian would win the Battle Royal, and he would go on to face Intercontinental Champion Cody Rhodes later on in the night and win the Intercontinental title. Here we go! Christian's back on track as a babyface after that world title feud. Come on! Haha, psych, he lost it to The Miz about 2 months later. Great. Just great. A completely needless title change at Raw 1000. And for the next 2 years, it's safe to say that Christian really just did nothing, and it's a true shame. He competed in the odd title match here and there, including against Alberto Del Rio at SummerSlam 2013 for the World Heavyweight title, making him one of the last people to wrestle in a match for the belt before it was unified and retired, but of course, he lost the match, and he competed in the 2014 WWE Championship Elimination Chamber match, even scoring an elimination over Sheamus, but of course, going on to lose the match. On the March 24th episode of Raw, Christian would win a number 1 contenders match for the Intercontinental title, also including Sheamus, Alberto Del Rio, and Dolph Ziggler, but this match would never happen as Christian suffered a concussion, and as it turns out, this would be Christian's final ever WWE match. So yeah, that was the career of Christian in TNA and WWE, and where was he better? What is the verdict? TNA, obviously. It's so obvious. Throughout his entire career at TNA, even though he wasn't winning titles all the time, he was a 2-time World Heavyweight Champion, where he was treated well as a champion, and throughout his entire time there, he was a main eventer, consistently putting on good matches, and just being used correctly, whereas in WWE, they were very inconsistent in the way they pushed him, stop-start pushes, really short transitional title reigns that would have been better if they just didn't happen, and overall, one of the most misused superstars of all time. Like, if I'm being honest, I mean, talk about a guy who should have had a good, lengthy world title reign and should be looked back as one of the greats of all time. I mean, that's not an understatement. I'm not trying to exaggerate there. I fully believe that. But that's going to do it for this video, guys. If you did enjoy, smack the like button. I really urge you guys to check out Wrestling's Premiere. one of the best wrestling channels on YouTube right now. Thank you so much to him for collaborating with me on this video. Let me know in the comments what YouTuber you want me to collab with next. I have a lot of plans for people who I would like to collab with and get in contact with, many of whom you'll probably be very interested in and excited about. But anyway, subscribe, notifications on. Link to my second channel is in the description, which I'm bringing back very soon. Like the video, comment down below, share it everywhere. See you all soon. Goodbye, and keep on rolling.